I still remember the month that split my life clean down the middle, one half that kept breathing, and the other that was buried with no chance of revival. It was the month I lost Ethan, and then, 3 weeks later, I lost the baby we had dreamed about every night. No one teaches you how to stand up after losing your whole family in less than a month. People told me I was strong, but the truth is simpler and crueler. I survived the way a broken door stays hanging only because its hinges haven't given out yet. Ethan died on a wet, misty evening. He had gone out to town to buy ginger tea for me because I was deep into pregnancy nausea. We had argued a little earlier that afternoon, not even a real fight, just two exhausted doctors fraying at the edges after endless hours in the air. He apologized, I smiled, and we were okay again. Then, a few hours later, the phone rang. The officer's voice was flat, detached, as if he were reporting a minor traffic issue and not the end of my entire world. Ethan's car had slipped on a fog-soaked incline, hit the guardrail, and everything ended in a matter of seconds. Aaron, his best friend, was the one who identified the body. I just stood frozen in the staff lounge, staring at the printed notification like it was written in a language my brain refused to process. The 3 weeks that followed were a slow-moving nightmare. I don't remember what I ate, whether I slept, or who I spoke to. Everything was fog. Until the morning, a bolt of pain twisted my abdomen so violently I collapsed to the bathroom floor. I was in my last month of pregnancy. I knew something was terribly wrong. I was rushed to the hospital in a panic, but still holding on to the only thing I had left, our baby. I had already lost one person. I could not lose another. The delivery room was a blinding white blur. The smell of antiseptic mixed with the shrill beeping of monitors, forming a suffocating haze. I remember gripping a nurse's hand. I remember someone shouting, "The fetal heart rate is dropping." I remember the icy drip of anesthesia and the fear crawling up my spine. But what I remember most was a single face standing at the end of the hallway, Margaret Elwood, Ethan's mother. Her eyes colder than the metal of the surgical instruments around me. She had always looked at me as though I were the reason her son's future was slipping out of her control. The truth? She had never liked me. From the very first time Ethan brought me home, Margaret had been polite but sharp, clinical. Her questions were wrapped in silk but pierced like needles. Where is your family from? Is your financial situation stable? Do you plan on quitting medicine when you have children? It felt like an interview, not a dinner invitation. And now, in the bright glare of the delivery room, the same disapproval radiated off her with surgical precision. Then chaos broke loose. We need to transfer to the auxiliary NICU now. Heart rates crashing. Push more anesthesia. I tried to speak, tried to hold on to some sliver of control, but the drugs were too strong. Just before unconsciousness swallowed me whole, I saw Margaret step forward, grip a doctor by the sleeve, and whisper something urgent. I couldn't hear her words. I only felt a cold ripple tear down my spine. When I opened my eyes again, the room was dimmer, quieter, and my world was infinitely darker. I woke in a recovery room, throat dry, abdomen numb, heart already sinking. The first face I saw wasn't a doctor. It wasn't a nurse. It was Margaret, sitting perfectly straight, hands folded, like she was attending a board meeting rather than witnessing the destruction of my life. The baby didn't make it, she said, for words. 4 blows that shattered everything inside me. I asked where the doctors were. I asked for an explanation, but every answer I received sounded rehearsed, detached, incomplete, as if the staff were reading from a script they had been forced to memorize. I asked to see my baby. I begged. Margaret placed a hand on my shoulder, soft, but cold as steel. The baby has already been taken. In cases like this, it's best the mother doesn't see. It would only cause more trauma. Then she signed a document in front of me, no explanation, no waiting for my consent. Just a signature from a woman acting as though she had full authority over my life and my child. I lay there, helpless, partly from the anesthesia, partly from the grief, partly because my heart had stopped believing it deserved anything at all. But there was one thing I never forgot, the ultrasound at 32 weeks, the half-moon birthmark under the left rib, the doctor's smile, a rare but harmless mark, Ethan kissing the screen. No one will ever mistake our baby for anyone else. When I woke after the emergency, no one mentioned the birthmark. No one handed me identification bands. No one spoke of the auxiliary NICU. No one told me where my baby had been taken, and so I truly believed that my child had died. I buried that pain for 9 long years. Believed fate had ripped everything from me. But I was wrong. The truth hadn't died with Ethan. It had simply been hidden, waiting to claw its way back to the surface, and it would return with the one thing no one could ever erase, a half-moon birthmark. In the months after the hospital took everything from me, I learned how silence could peel the soul layer by layer. People kept telling me to move on, as if grief were a room you could simply walk out of when the light switch failed. I returned to work far too early, mostly because the apartment felt too loud, even in its stillness. The air at Steedy Alden had always been chaotic, but now the chaos was a shield frenzied enough to drown the echo of a life that had ended before it began. I tried to convince myself that what happened was a tragedy without villains, just another cruel twist of fate that medicine couldn't save me from. But deep down, in the part of the mind that whispers the truths we don't want to hear, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that night didn't fit. It wasn't just the missing documents or the evasive answers. It wasn't even the blank chart that should have recorded every second of my child's brief existence. It was the way Margaret walked out of my recovery room calm, composed, and almost relieved. Ethan's colleagues told me she had always been protective, calculating, and fiercely committed to shaping her son's future as if it were a business plan. I had seen glimpses of it, but nothing that hinted at the extent she might go to when she believed she was losing control. For a while, I pushed those suspicions down because I needed to survive. And suspicion is a luxury only the emotionally intact can afford. So I focused on routine. I focused on breathing. I focused on rebuilding a life around a hollow space that would never be filled. There were nights too many to count when I would wake up drenched in sweat, hand pressed against the empty curve of my abdomen, remembering the half-moon birthmark the doctor had pointed to during that last ultrasound. It became an anchor I didn't want but couldn't release, the only part of my child I could still picture without crumbling. But memories warp when touched too many times. I began to doubt myself, wonder if grief had painted the past with details that never existed. I convinced myself the birthmark didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Not anymore. Years passed the way rain erodes stone, slowly but relentlessly. I became a pediatric surgeon, the very job Ethan once dreamed of taking alongside me, and the specialty I once feared would break me, because every child I saved reminded me of the one I lost. But strangely, it healed me. Too, it stitched over wounds I thought were permanent, one tiny heartbeat at a time. The hospital became my world. My colleagues became the closest thing to family I allowed myself to have. I stopped attending holidays, stopped dating, stopped letting anyone close. People assumed I was dedicated, career-driven, ambitious. The truth was simpler. I was terrified that loving again would only give the universe something else to take. Still, there were days when the grief softened into something quiet rather than violent. Days when I could walk past the NICU without feeling my chest collapse. Days when I could imagine a future that didn't revolve around loss. And on those rare days, I almost believed I had survived something impossible. Almost. Then, 9 years after losing everything, a transfer file landed on my desk. A child with a congenital heart defect, rare, delicate, requiring intervention. A condition that mirrored the one doctors once warned me my baby might face if carried to term. I didn't think much of it. Congenital heart conditions were not uncommon in my line of work. But something in the description made my pulse skip. The child had been admitted from a private pediatric facility owned by the Elwood family. Margaret's family. Ethan's family. I stared at the file for a long time, unable to swallow, unable to look away. It could have been coincidence. I told myself it was coincidence. But coincidences had razor edges in my life, they cut too cleanly to be ignored. And as I traced the words on the page, a strange foreboding settled in my chest, as if a door I had nailed shut years ago was beginning to shake violently from the other side. I tried to dismiss it. I tried to breathe. I tried to be logical. But logic had never survived long when Margaret Elwood was involved. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know yet, was that this file, this one ordinary transfer request, would become the first thread I would pull. And once pulled, the entire tapestry of lies that had held my grief in place for 9 years would begin to come undone. By the time I reached the hallway outside the observation unit, I could feel every muscle in my body locked in place, as if bracing for a storm I had spent 9 years pretending didn't exist. Liam, though I still didn't allow myself to use his name, was stabilized for the moment, but the urgency of his condition left no room for delay. I had minutes, maybe less, before surgery needed to begin. Yet Margaret stood in the middle of the hallway like a ghost summoned by the past, small and pale beneath the sterile hospital lights, clutching her handbag as if it were the only thing tying her to the ground. Seeing her there felt like a punch to the chest. I hadn't seen her in almost a decade, not since the day she told me my child was gone and signed paperwork I never fully understood. Her hair had thinned, her cheeks were sunken, and she carried the sharp fragility of someone already halfway into the grave. But her eyes, those cold, disciplined eyes, were exactly the same. "Madison," she whispered, voice trembling. "You're the attending surgeon?" "Yes," I replied, my tone sharper than any scalpel I had ever held. And apparently you're the one who brought him here." Her breath hitched. I didn't expect it to be you. Didn't you?" I stepped closer. "Because I've been expecting this moment for 9 years." She flinched but didn't turn away. That alone told me more than her words would have. I glanced at the boy through the glass, his small chest rising unevenly, sensors stuck to his skin, a faint bruise where the EMTs had placed pressure. Then my eyes dropped to the hem of his hospital gown, and once again, that unmistakable half-moon birthmark sat exactly where the ultrasound technician had pointed all those years ago. Every part of me shook. No more coincidences. No more doubts. No more pretending. I looked straight at her. "Explain the birthmark." Her face blanched. "Madison." "No," I snapped. "No more evasions. No more rehearsed lines. Tell me why a child under your care has a half-moon birthmark beneath his left rib, the exact same birthmark I saw in the ultrasound at 32 weeks. Tell me why he wears a bracelet I made during my pregnancy. Tell me why his eyes look exactly like Ethan's." Margaret's composure cracked like a porcelain mask struck by a hammer. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then gripped the railing as her knees buckled. Her voice came out as a rasp. "I knew you would recognize him. I always knew." My stomach turned cold. "So it's true." She wept, not gently, but with a violent, choking guilt that scraped through the hallway. "I never meant to destroy you," she stammered. Ethan had died. The Elwood name was all I had left. The baby's heart defect was severe, and the doctors weren't sure if you would survive the delivery. They told me he needed emergency transfer to a facility that could handle congenital cardiac complications or private NICU. And in that moment, everything in me screamed that I was the one meant to protect him. I felt sick. Protect him? By stealing him? She shook her head desperately. "I didn't steal him, I saved him. They said you were crashing. They said he might not make it. I asked them to take him. I told them I would handle everything. And what about telling me my child was dead?" Her lips trembled. I panicked. "You were unconscious. The doctors were overwhelmed. I thought, if I told you he lived, you would fight me. And I had already convinced myself that you weren't strong enough to raise a sick child alone." "You convinced yourself," I repeated, voice dangerously low. "Not the doctors. Not anyone. Just you." She bowed her head. "Yes, just me." Something inside me snapped. An old, wounded part that had been screaming into the void for years finally clawed its way out. I leaned in, my voice razor thin. "You robbed me of my son. You robbed him of his mother. You robbed both of us of 9 years." Margaret sobbed harder, clutching her chest as if every accusation pierced straight through. I know, Madison. I have been preparing for this moment since the day I realized he would one day look too much like Ethan to hide. I thought I had more time, but my cancer is spreading faster than they predicted. I won't live long enough to keep lying, and I don't want to die with the sin still buried." Her confession didn't soften me, it hollowed me out. Because it meant every nightmare I had endured was real. Every doubt I had silenced was justified. Every fear I had swallowed was truth. "The only thing I want now," she whispered, voice barely steady, "is for you to save him. And when he wakes, I want him to know who his mother really is. I won't hide anymore. I can't." I stared at her, rage crashing against grief colliding with a love I had tried to forget. Liam needed me. That was the only certainty in a world built on lies. I straightened my shoulders. "I will save him. Not for you, for him. And when this is over, you and I will finish this conversation." She nodded weakly, tears dripping onto her trembling hands. "I understand, but I didn't walk away out of forgiveness. I walked away because a surgeon had a job to do and a mother had just realized she was about to hold her child again for the first time in 9 stolen years. The surgery lasted nearly 4 hours, though to me it felt like a lifetime suspended between breaths. Every precise movement of my hands, every cut, every irrigation, every adjustment on the retractor, carried a weight I could barely withstand. I had performed hundreds of operations in my career, complicated, dangerous, time-sensitive procedures, but never one where my own heartbeat seemed to pulse through the surgical field. The congenital defect in his tiny heart had caused secondary complications, a fragile chain of events that could shatter if I hesitated even a fraction of a second. I reminded myself repeatedly, steady hands, steady breath, steady mind. But beneath the sterile discipline, beneath the rhythm I had trained into muscle memory for years, something softer trembled, something raw, maternal, ancient. I wasn't just saving a child. I was reclaiming 9 years of stolen fate. When the final suture was tied and the monitors dipped back into stable patterns, a wave of trembling relief washed over the room. My team sighed, exchanging looks of exhausted triumph. I didn't feel triumph. I felt emptied. As the nurses prepared to move him, I lingered, gloved hands suspended in the air, staring at the small, pale curve of his cheek, the rise and fall of his chest fragile, but fighting. I wanted to stay, to press my forehead to his, to whisper every apology I had swallowed for nearly a decade. But I forced myself to step back, hands clasped behind me, like a soldier holding formation. Emotion could wait. His life could not. When I walked out of the door, Margaret was waiting. She looked like she'd aged 10 more years in the hours since I'd last seen her. Her fingers twisted at the strap of her purse, knuckles bone white. When she rose, her voice cracked before the words even formed. "Madison, is he?" "He's alive," I answered, letting the words fall cold and sharp. "And he is my son." The confession struck her like a blow. Her lips quivered, and tears slid down her pallid cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered with a kind of desperate reverence. "I know nothing can undo what I've done, nothing. But before I die, I wanted the truth to come out. I wanted him to be yours again, not mine." I stared at her. I had imagined rage in this moment, imagined screaming, imagined throwing every broken fragment of my life back into her trembling hands. But instead, I saw a woman already unraveling, ravaged by illness, trapped in regret, and haunted by choices she could never reverse. Life had punished her far more thoroughly than I ever could. Days passed. Liam woke slowly, drifting in and out of awareness, each flicker of consciousness another thread pulling tight around my heart. I sat beside him without my white coat, without gloves, without anything that hid the truth of who I was. Just a woman, terrified and full of hope. When his eyes finally opened with clarity, soft, brown and confused, he blinked at me. "Who are you?" he whispered, voice fragile from intubation and pain. I smiled, though it nearly broke me. "I'm Madison. And I'm very glad you're awake." I didn't tell him. Not yet. Children deserve truth served gently, not delivered like a blow. So I stayed, talking quietly, adjusting his blankets, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. He seemed comforted by my presence without understanding why. Some instinctive recognition, a thread between us still intact despite everything. It was Margaret who told him. One afternoon, while Liam rested in the recovery wing, she sat beside him, her breathing shallow, her strength fading in visible increments. I stood outside the glass, unable to move, my palm pressed to my chest. "Liam," I heard her say with a trembling voice, "there is something you have the right to know. Your mother, your real mother, is alive, and she's the woman who's been taking care of you since the surgery." Silence. A small, sharp silence that sliced through me. Then his weak voice surfaced. "Madison is my mom?" I stepped into the room. Margaret looked at me with exhausted gratitude and deep remorse. Liam's eyes widened, searching mine for confirmation. I sat beside him, my hands shaking. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm your mom." He reached out hesitant, unsure, placing his tiny hand against my cheek. The warmth of it undid me completely. When I enveloped him in my arms, he clung to me with a need that sliced through every scar I had carried for 9 years. Margaret passed away 2 weeks later in a hospice suite overlooking the hospital gardens. I was there not for her, not out of forgiveness, but because Liam needed someone to hold on to while the only grandmother he had ever known slipped away. She died clutching a letter she wrote for him, her breath fading like a candle's last trembling flame. When it was over, something inside me released not a forgiveness, not closure, but a loosening of the bind her lies had placed around my life. Now, every morning when Liam calls me Mom, the word still feels new, fragile, miraculous, sacred. We are learning to be a family, piecing together a life from jagged remnants. Some wounds will never fully heal, but we are building something real in the spaces between them. One evening, standing on the shoreline while the sun burned gold across the water, Liam placed a small toy airplane, Ethan's old one, onto the sand. "I think Dad would like this place," he said softly. I squeezed his hand. "I think he'd be proud of you. And I think this is where we begin again." The wind carried the salt of the sea across our faces. And for the first time in 9 years, I felt the world shift not back to what it had been, but towards something new, something possible. A sunrise after a decade-long night.